And one of the things I wanted to cover today is the Docker image, which has been added. And that's definitely going to help enormously in terms of integrating pbi-tools into CI/CD pipelines, which I wanted to show just in terms of demo. Yeah, I'll just get started with that if that's okay.
Yeah, feel free. So
I've got one project open. Let me start here. So if you've seen previous talks I've given, you will be aware of this Azure DevOps sample project which I set up, which actually has 4 different pbi-tools pipelines just to demonstrate different ways of automating deployments using pbi-tools. This is all public, by the way, so everything I'm looking at right now you can see as well. When I first set us up, there was no Docker image available. So what I had to do was to obviously bring the pbi-tools executable into the pipeline. The initial setup was to actually have the exe as part of the repository. That was fine for the demo, and it's fine for setting it up once, but it's not very scalable and it's not a very nice way to manage that. So now with the Docker image in place, it's going to be much easier to look at. So this example here, simple LFS, is one which I've converted already. And when we look at the merge request that's related to the switch, we can see remove the .tool subfolder, which basically contained a full copy of the executable, and everything else was just an update in the Azure Pipelines YAML file. And down here, we can see the changes. So first of all, I switched from a Windows image to a Ubuntu image. So the Docker image is just Linux. There's no Windows Docker image. There's no need for that. And then this is actually the crucial change here. Basically, the YAML file has a new property container, which references pbi-tools-core, which is the image name. It's hosted on GitHub. So GHCR is the GitHub container registry. And I'm using latest as the tag here. Latest will always be on the most recent full release. So it's basically a straightforward way of always staying up to date. And then the only things I had to change down here was basically the path, right? So basically previously tool pbi-tools was referenced as in a local folder, whereas now we've got an absolute path here, /app/pbi-tools. That's coming from the container. So this is something which you're always going to reference. Everything else is exactly the same because the tool has always been cross-platform. So it behaves on Windows in exactly the same way as it does on Linux. If we're looking at this in terms of how can I get started with the Docker image locally? And I appreciate, the Power BI audience is probably not one with lots and lots of experience around Docker, so which is why I'm going to provide a few examples here. And it would be good in terms of feedback to hear, how much sort of tutorial and getting started people would like to see. I've created a list of some example Docker commands here. As usual, I'm using VS Code, and I can only heavily recommend to install the VS Code Docker extension, which sorry, which actually helps in visualizing what's currently running. If I take this command here, and just copy that into my shell and run it. There we go. I've just created and run a Docker container, and in this particular case, I've actually run the pbi-tools Docker container. For some reason, I can't scroll up here, so I'm just going to do it once more so we can see the full output. There we go. So that's the full output. And so what am I doing here? I'm doing Docker run, which executes a container. Sorry. I'm giving the container a name, which is completely optional. I'm specifying RM, which means remove or delete the container when you're done running it. And then I'm specifying the image name, which again is the one on the GitHub registry. When you run that image without specifying anything else, without specifying a particular command, by default it will run pbi-tools info, which basically gives you some metadata information about your environment. So you can see, even though I'm on Windows right now, this actually executed on Linux, and specifically it executed on WSL2, which is what Docker desktop uses. We can also see the version and everything else. So that's that. If I use a slightly different command, this one here, I'm going to create a container, and IT, this one, actually makes it interactive. So that means I'm then going to stay inside the container, and now I can actually run commands on Bash, which I've launched as my start application here. So this now is a complete Linux-based OS, if you will. And we can also see down here in the VS Code Docker extension that under containers, this is currently running, this is currently showing as a running container. Now, the extension is fantastic because when you've got a container, you can actually see all your files which are in here, right? So for instance, pbi-tools actually happens to be installed here under app and pbi-tools. So if I go there and run this, the exact same thing happens in terms of output, and that's a very neat way of actually getting started with it. If I exit out of that, then the container disappears because I specified RM. Now, down here, I've got a slightly more comprehensive example, and this is actually using pbi-tools for deployments. So let me walk you through what I'm doing here. First of all, I'm referencing an environment file which contains environment settings, including my password. I'm then referencing a volume which maps a local folder into my container as a virtual file system there. I then call pbi-tools deploy. I'm referencing a folder which is actually in my Windows file system. And I'm running the deployment. I'm running the deployment profile called profile1 in what if mode. So that basically runs the deployment without actually deploying anything. So and here we go. That's working perfectly. In the sense that this is what we expect to see when we run what if. So it's basically iterating through my folder. If if I just go into Explorer, we can see that same folder is under X tutorials, deploy demo. So this is the one I'm talking about. There are two PBIX files in here, report 1, report 2. If I now rerun the same thing, dropping the what if, it's actually deploying it into my Power BI tenant. Here we go. So this is you running pbi-tools in a Docker container without even having to install anything apart from obviously Docker on your machine, and being able to see exactly what pbi-tools would be doing in a Linux environment and presumably in a CI/CD container. In terms of putting it into Azure, the project I did show earlier is basically this one here, very straightforward. I no longer have to keep the executable as part of my repo. All I need to do is to reference the container here. Azure will then fetch it automatically. Obviously, I have to make sure that the VM image which runs the job is compatible. And so Ubuntu latest is always the preferred option here. Everything else is exactly the same. I also have an example in GitHub. Let's look at this here. That one, same thing. I've got a GitHub Actions workflow file in here. This is a GitHub Actions file. YAML syntax, very, very similar to Azure DevOps, just slight nuances which are different. And we're also specifying Ubuntu latest here. And then here we're specifying the container image. Everything else is the same. Yeah, so that's basically what it looks like in terms of the new container image. Quite interesting that this won't load. We actually seem to have oh, that one loads. Okay, very good. Took a little while. Okay, I don't know why it's not behaving right now. But we've already seen what I was going to show anyways. Any questions as far as Docker is concerned?
I don't see any questions, but I would, of course, ask myself because I'm a Docker noob. I know exactly as much as I need to know as a user to use it sometimes. So for anyone who never has anything to Docker before, I would explain it. It's like a virtual computer you can pass as a file, and you can run Power BI tools on it, and other tools, of course. So just a noob explanation for Docker for some people, from the Power BI and citizen development community who never had anything to do with Docker. And quite impressive that you make it run now. So what was your major benefits in business to have this extension, to have the ability to run Power BI tools in a Docker?
The main use case really is deployment, and particularly being able to integrate pbi-tools easily into Azure DevOps or GitHub Actions or even GitLab, which would be another of those common CI/CD environments. All you need to do for any given repo is two things. One, the pbi-tools deployment manifest, which I've already covered in other talks. And then having the YAML file defining your build or deployment logic. And you don't have to worry about how would I make pbi-tools available to GitHub or Azure or GitLab, right? Because that's all handled in literally one line of code like this one, where all you need to do is to actually specify this container. So this is about convenience. It's about scalability. It keeps your repositories much leaner because you don't have to put any executables in there. And it also it should also help in terms of actually providing those YAML files as templates where you literally copy paste when you want to set up a new project. That's really where I'm trying to get to moving forward.